Director of Emergency Management for Harris County, County Judge Ed Emmett.
Harris County Judge Ed Emmett.
This is not an event you can call for evacuations.
30% of your county underwater right now.
The biggest challenge is going to get people back in their homes. We've got probably 30 to 40,000 homes that have been destroyed.
This is something that neighbor to neighbor, we just have to pitch in and help each other.
Working with the federal government, state government, we've got to get those people back into their normal lives as soon as possible.
Either our definition of a 500-year reign needs to be updated, or we can hope that we're free and clear for the next 1,500 years.
Well, good morning. It's a quiet group. Let me start. How many of you are not from Texas? Okay. Let me start with an explanation. Why is a judge standing here? Well, that's why that video puts me in perspective a little bit. I'm the county judge of Harris County, Texas, which is the third largest county in the United States. Has more people in 26 states. Houston's the largest city, but it's less than half the population of the county. We have 33 other communities. And in unincorporated Harris County, we have 1.8 million people. But as the county judge, I'm not really a judge. I'm not even a lawyer. Anywhere else, I might be called the county executive, but even that's not quite right because I and the 4 county commissioners have equal votes in running the county. And collectively, we're called the Commissioner's Court. But we're not a court. So I wake up every day being a judge that's not a judge, presiding over a court that's not a court. And people wonder why I'm a little bit confused. Well, it gets worse because under Texas law after 9/11, the legislature said there's got to be one person in charge of Homeland Security and Emergency Management in each of the 254 counties, and that's the county judge. So it's not the mayor of Houston. Clearly, mayors have responsibility in their jurisdictions, but overall in the county, it is the county judge, and that really confuses the national media a great deal. But nevertheless, that's why I'm here. But I'm an elected official. I'm elected countywide. And so I'm here this morning to take a different tack from what is going on in most of your sessions. You know, you're the experts. You're the professional floodplain managers. But no matter what you do, no matter how expert you are, no matter how good your ideas are, ultimately, there are going to be political office holders like me who have to make the right decisions. And so that's what I'm here to talk about. My perspective and a discussion of your role. Now, I became county judge back on March 6, 2007. And as I told you, I'm not a real judge, and I didn't know before becoming county judge that I was the Director of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. So for 11 years, I've had the privilege of serving in that role. And during that time, our Office of Emergency Management has dealt with numerous crises, hurricanes, winter storms, and by the way, for a winter storm for us is 1/8 of an inch of ice. But those are fun. We had one earlier this year, and it was great because we can't drive on ice. It doesn't matter how much it is. But I was able to go on television and say, everybody stay home for a day. It's going to be 70 degrees this weekend. Those are easy. We do flood events, obviously, as you heard. We had 3 major floods in the last 2 years. Wildfires, though nothing compared to what we're going to hear about later on. Chemical spills plus more. So, if I figure out which way to point this. That's a photo of the Emergency Operations Center in Harris County, Texas. You can't really grasp the scale There are 98 workstations. We have everybody from federal assets down to the local nonprofits. During a full activation, we'll have 400 to 500 people that are there 24/7. And it's state of the art. I can monitor traffic all the way to Dallas, to San Antonio, to Austin. I can tell you what planes are in the sky, what ships are in the sea. We learned during the evacuation for Rita, I was not the judge at the time, but we learned that it's not just about Harris County. We have to be in the surrounding counties. So I can tell you the name of the deputy constable that's supposed to be working an intersection in Giddings, Texas. And if they don't show up and check in on their laptop, we find out where they are and who's going to take their place. Likewise, if a hurricane comes our way, and we talk about evacuations in the traditional sense from storm surge, I have to be sure that Galveston and Brazoria counties are evacuated before we put our people on the road, because they have to come right through Harris County. So we have the technology to deal with. And I don't expect you to read this, but some people always ask me, are we ready for an event? I go, yeah, we're ready for any event that comes. That's our organization chart. And you can see it's filled. And how do we respond? Well, there you have that. And again, this is just up there to show you the extent. We're all under the National Incident Management System. Everybody's trained. We have full-time professionals. I'm the face of this operation, but the truth of the matter is I could disappear. It would operate just fine. They just have to find somebody else to go out and explain to the public what's going on. The rain spawned by Harvey, though, changed my life and redefined my job. And by the way, Harvey was not a hurricane when it came to Harris County. It was a hurricane when it hit the Texas coast, but it was just a rain event, which made it very difficult to deal with, because you evacuate in a hurricane. Like I said, it's easy. You calculate the storm surge, you figure out which areas are going to be inundated, you evacuate those areas, and you tell everybody else to shelter in place. But with Harvey, we had no idea where the flood was going to be. So there was no way to evacuate, and despite the fact that a certain state official intimated that we should have evacuated the entire county prior to Harvey, that would have meant on Wednesday, on a nice sunshiny day like we have today, I would have gone on national television and told everybody in Harris County, all 4.5 million, to leave, close their business and leave, and people would have laughed hysterically because nobody would have done that. And if they'd waited later to try and leave, then we would have had the disaster on the evacuation, not from the storm. So that was really not part of it. So prior to August 2017, my role of managing the Office of Emergency Management, it was important. I knew that. I and my staff had to implement plans to protect the lives and property of the residents of Harris County, and I was the face of that effort before the media and the general public. Our team was truly well prepared for anything that came our way. Like I said, we're all trained in the NIMS system. We had plans and timelines for every eventuality. And with a little bit of bragging, we were really good at what we did. As potential disasters came our way in the past, I would put aside my daily priorities, such as road projects, mental health, which, by the way, is my real passion, juvenile justice programs, and the thing that caused me the most grief, trying to figure out what to do with the Astrodome. And if you're from Texas, you understand how controversial that was. And then I'd go out and I'd rally our forces at our Office of Emergency Management, and we'd do our job, and then we'd all go back to normal. After Harvey, there is no normal. Parts of Harris County received more than 50 inches of rain in a 4-day period. This rain event was the third major flooding episode in less than 3 years. But Harvey was so much worse than the first two. More than 150,000 homes flooded in Harris County alone. Nearly 105,000 of those homes were not insured because technically they weren't in a floodplain. Of course, clearly they were in a floodplain. They just didn't know they were in a floodplain. which is why I'm here with you today. The state of Texas and other responders and relief agencies were unable to come to our aid quickly because the roads were impassable and the state assets had been sent where they should have been sent, to where the hurricane came in on the Gulf Coast south of us. First responders were overwhelmed and the 911 emergency call system crashed. Fortunately, I was able to tap a resource that saved hundreds of lives in the nick of time. And you're seeing a picture of it. In the middle of one day, against the advice of professionals, I went on television and I asked the general public to come help. If you have a boat, come help us. So private citizens with boats and high water vehicles showed up by the thousands to rescue their neighbors and complete strangers. They were not sightseeing about Hurricane Harvey, despite what the President of the United States said a couple of weeks ago. These people were risking their lives to save other lives. And I might add that we learned something. They were so frantic to get to people and move them out of harm's way. They didn't keep track of where they were putting them. So the next day when we started to move them into shelters, we didn't know where they were because they'd been put in convenience stores and gas stations, any high ground they could find. So our system now, in the future, we will give an RFID chip to each group that's rescued and say, hold on to this chip so we know where to come get you, so that then we can put you into a shelter. Now, asking people to come out and help was not brilliant. Texans were going to do that whether I asked them to or not. It was just our way of trying to coordinate it, and that will be part of our response going forward, because there's no way that a government agency, a sheriff's office, a police department is ever going to have enough boats for an event like this. So we have to know what our assets really are, and so those are going to be public. When the City of Houston's mass shelter was at capacity and FEMA was unable to get into our area to set up another shelter, Red Cross wasn't helpful. They couldn't do anything because they're a volunteer organization. Their people were trapped. So I turned to a local nonprofit agency known as Baker Ripley, and within 6 hours they established a 10,000-person capacity shelter that frankly will be the model for all future shelters. Ironically, the one thing we've been criticized the most from publications such as ProPublica is that we didn't follow our plan when it came to setting up a shelter, to which I say, hell, Harvey didn't follow our plan either. You have to bend the rules. No plan foresaw an event like Harvey, but our area survived. We broke other rules. For example, I got a call in the middle of one night from the San Jacinto County judge, and that's a rural county, 2 counties north of us. They had 200 people in an elementary school. It was not supposed to be a shelter. They had food because they'd raided the cafeteria, but they didn't have any other necessities. Wanted me to call the state. I said, well, the state can't get there either. So one of the Harris County trucks took a wrong turn and ended up 2 counties away in Cold Spring, Texas. Was that legal? Probably not. Was it authorized? Absolutely not. Was it the right thing to do? Absolutely. And I'd do it again. You know, I never really want to have to give speeches about this kind of topic in the future. But today I'm here, no doubt, because of my role with Harvey. What are we going to do to make sure that our community is resilient going forward? Now, given my background as a government official and a politician whose previous expertise was really transportation, speaking about resilience and flood control in front of a group like this is a little bit daunting. However, it is people like me who will ultimately have to make the right decisions if our communities are to become resilient in terms of meeting the challenges of disasters, whether natural or man-made. So I try and organize my thoughts in a logical fashion. I started out at Rice as a physics major. That didn't go very well. That lasted a semester. Then I became an economics major. So I still have this sort of fixation on formulas. So with that in mind, and with apologies to real mathematicians, I came up with my own formula for how do we make our community resilient. And there it is. And for those of you who are really wonks and want a handout, I've got about 100 copies that I can leave in the back of the room when this is through. Bear with me. 2P plus 2R times PPR equals resilience. Now, you know everything inside one parenthesis is multiplied by everything in the other parentheses. First P, the first task is to prevent disasters. That's your job. We can't prevent hurricanes. We can't prevent heavy rains, but we have to mitigate their impact. We have to take steps to minimize their impact, because the event itself is not a disaster. The impact of the event is the disaster. Flood control and mitigation projects, building codes and restrictions, maximizing green space, those are all prevention tools. And I know you have session after session after session about that. The second P is preparation. We know that we can't prevent everything. We know that we're going to get hit by disasters. So how do we prepare for it? And you saw earlier, Harris County is well prepared. We're ready to go. We have to remind people all the time that it's hurricane season. So every June 1st, we put out all kinds of public announcements and say it's hurricane season. You live on the Gulf Coast, get ready, and we're ready. Then you have the 2 R's. If you know you're going to have an impact of a disaster, you have to be able to respond. Inevitably, we know a disaster will befall our county. Our response will always be based on well-thought-out plans for evacuation, shelters, law enforcement, health care, myriad of other actions. But as Harvey showed us, the best plans are frequently inadequate. The key to really having a good response is to have trained, dedicated people in position to make clear decisions in a timely manner. The lady who made the decision to send that truck to San Jacinto County did not have to ask me. She just did it. She was our logistics person, and it was the right thing to do. The second R is a good deal harder: recovery. We're still getting checks from the federal government for Hurricane Ike, which was 10 years ago. We still have thousands of people out of their homes and businesses still closed from Harvey. So how quickly we return to our previous condition, it's really not the measure of resilience for me. The real recovery comes when we know lives are back to normal and we have taken steps to make similar future disasters less impactful. Prevention, preparation, response, and recovery are all very complex subjects that should be the focus of what you do: specialized research and expertise. You know, throughout history, a lot of that's just been based on experience. But we need to share that experience, and that's what conferences like this are about. But it's not enough to say the 2 P's and the 2 R's are the answer to assuring resilience, because you notice there's a multiplier in the equation, and that multiplier is made up of 3 factors. And it's that multiplier that really determines the effectiveness of our efforts, and that multiplier is PPR. The first P, policies. Governments and private companies, too, must put policies in place to develop and support prevention, preparation, response, and recovery. The 2 P's and the 2 R's don't happen by themselves. And when you talk about policies, we're in an election year. Do you see any commercials being run about policies for mitigation or policies for flood control? Or no. You see policies about, don't even get me started there. And even if you have the right policies, unless you put priorities on it, it doesn't matter, and that's the second P. Harris County is a great example. One of the first things you have to do as an elected official is admit that you didn't do it right. And we didn't do it right in Harris County. We have a great Harris County flood control district. But over the years, in a budget approaching $2 billion a year, we've allocated about $120 million a year to the Harris County Flood Control District. 60 for operation and maintenance, and 60 for CapEx. It's not enough. And so all of us in elected office in Harris County need to be willing to admit, hey, we didn't do enough. So what's the R? Well, the R is the key. It's resources. Forward-thinking policies and the right priorities are necessary, but if you don't pay for them, they don't do you any good at all. So 2P plus 2R times PPR equals resilience. And the only way we get there is by being willing to spend the money to do it. This formula brings all the necessary elements together, but anybody who knows math, if you have a really small number in one of those elements, you're going to end up with a small amount of resilience. That's why Harris County, on August 25th, is having a special election for a $2.5 billion bond dedicated totally to flood control and mitigation. We've caught some grief over, well, why are you having it on a special day? Well, August 25th happens to be the one-year anniversary of Harvey. We're going to have all these news stories out there, and I didn't want to go a whole year without being able to say we're doing something. And I wanted it away from the general election because, frankly, it's much, much, much more important than anything about partisan politics. And on the election in November, we're going to have everybody from senator to governor to Congress to county judge to 80 judicial positions to the county clerk. They're all going to be on that ballot. I wanted people to come out. So we are now engaged in having a public engagement session. We're having meetings in each of the 23 watersheds. We're meeting with any group, anytime, anywhere, because we've got to make sure that we're willing to pay for the expertise that people like you generate. Now, a little bit of history. I think I'm still doing okay on time here. Downtown Houston flooded in 1936. And the Corps of Engineers, along with the town fathers, sorry ladies, there were no town mothers back in those days, decided to build two great reservoirs west of town, 20 miles out of town, called Addicks and Barker. And they were so far out of town, nobody was ever going to live there. Well, we have built up all the way to the dams, and inexplicably, we've actually built behind the dams. Now, looking back on it, you go, you built a subdivision behind a dam? Really? That wasn't the smartest thing for us to do, and we have to be willing to admit that. But the bigger problem is, as Harris County developed and the city of Houston developed and all the other little cities developed, nobody kept track of the old tributaries and creeks. And so as a result, when Harvey came, the water was about to come around the end of the dam on Addicks Reservoir, and nobody knew where it was going to flow. So then the decision was made by the Corps of Engineers to open the floodgates, because at least you knew where that water was going. And I think personally that was a right decision. There's a lawsuit going on. I'm not part of it, but I don't want to get in it. But we have to do a better job of knowing what our risks are. And we don't know that right now. So that release was done in the middle of the night, and thousands of homes downstream were flooded. Throughout Harris County, homes and businesses and families were paying a heavy price for weakness in decisions that had been made in the past and our resilience formula used in the county. On a personal note, my youngest daughter's family was taken out by boat. The county, as you saw in that slide earlier, if I can get back to it, resembled Dunkirk. Too many people lost everything. People and pets were lost. Some died. I was in the command center, which you saw as a world-class emergency operations center, surrounded by a well-trained staff of professionals with representatives of all levels of government and the private sector. The national media was there, and they bore witness to what I think was a Herculean effort. But it really wasn't put in perspective for me until after 6 nights in our emergency operations center with a total of 11 hours of sleep, and that's not a request for sympathy. It's just I wasn't alone. We were all in that circumstance. I drove home finally. Harvey had left us. Sun was shining. And my daughter, whose family had been taken out by boat, had gotten with a church and had decided to put folding tables out where they could give away thousands of pairs of new shoes. And she called and said, "I'd like you to come over and greet the volunteers." And I thought, well, sure. That's an easy thing to do after what I've been through. Turned out not to be the case. After showering and changing into fresh clothes, I drove toward her house. And at the time, I was talking to a staff member who was in Austin for the legislative session. When I turned onto my daughter's street, my world changed. I told the person I was talking to, I said, "I'm going to have to call you back. I need a moment." Because what we saw were debris piles lining both sides of the street. And at that moment, I knew that we had to do better. And that's why I'm here. Because what you see are not debris piles. What you see are people's lives, and they're on the curb. And if people like me don't make the right decisions based upon the expertise and the advice of people like you, then this will continue to happen. But I wanted to be here at this conference specifically to say to all of you, what you do is so impactful and so important. If you have to grab people like me by the throat and shake us to get us to do the right thing, do it. Because this is the scene that none of us want to see in the future. Thank you very much.